Greetings from Brazil. I am speaking to you from Rio de Janeiro. I have been here for about a week and I haven't posted anything the past week because I was exploring the city, but now I will post more. So I'm staying at Leblon, which is a nice area in Rio de Janeiro, and from what I heard, it has the best beach. So this is where I am. That's the quick personal update. And moving on to the topic of today, we are going to talk about a lesson from the Turkish currency crisis. So if you have been paying attention to the news, you probably know that recently Turkey has had a currency crisis. Its currency, the Turkish Lira, has devalued significantly. But to preface, to give you a summary, or to give you an introduction, to my thoughts, I would like to say the past year has made me realize how fragile currencies are, especially modern currencies, which are fiat money. Because if you think about it, modern currencies are basically paper money, but now things are more digital, so you can say it's digital money. And whether if it's paper or digital currency, it doesn't have inherent value. The only use for the US dollar or the Turkish lira or the Chinese yuan or European euro is really to buy and sell stuff. It's really just used as a currency. It doesn't have inherent value. We only give it value because the government guarantees that we can use it to exchange things and to buy things and to sell things. And that, I think, is very fragile, as many countries like Turkey have experienced currency collapses. And the government money really is reliant on central banks and on governments to be competent, and we rely on their goodwill as well. So because of this, because the whole structure of government money depends on the competence and the goodwill of governments and central banks, this makes it very fragile. And that is why we should look at the Turkish Lira crisis and see what lessons we can get from that, and see what actions and what solutions you can take to protect your wealth. So if you're familiar with the Turkish currency crisis, you know that the Turkish Lira has lost 45% of its value this year alone. And in November alone, the Turkish Lira depreciated by 30% against the US dollar. And this is a huge currency crisis. In Turkey, a lot of people have lost their wealth. People who have saved money had their savings devalued. They can't use their money to buy as much as they could before. There have been major protests because of the purchasing power erosion, and people just can't buy as much. So they're poorer. You hear stories about people cutting down on food, buying less meat, buying less luxuries. People can't pay for books for school for their children. They can't buy a lot of things, and they're basically becoming poorer because of this currency crisis. And generally speaking, this crisis will lead and has led to a lower standard of living in Turkey. And the cause for the Turkish currency crisis really goes back to what I was saying about government money, in that it is really reliant on the competence and the goodwill of the government and the central bank, which is not always guaranteed. So if you look at the Turkish Lira crisis, you can see that a lot of it is caused by mismanagement by the government. Turkish economic policies were not good in curbing inflation, which had accelerated in the past year. And the main trigger for the inflation was actually because of the mismanagement of interest rates in Turkey. The Turkish government slashed interest rates during inflation, which caused inflation to accelerate. Also, the Turkish central bank, or the government, was printing a lot of money as well, which leads to inflation. And that is obvious, that is simple economics. If you have a bigger money supply chasing the same amount of goods, then your money will be worth less and it will be devalued. And there was also other contributing factors, such as a large current account deficit in Turkey, which also contributed to inflation. But the main point is that it was caused by mismanagement by the government and by the central bank. And we will talk about why this is a problem, and this is something we should learn from, not just in Turkey, but in other countries all around the world, because right now all countries rely on government money. The main lesson I want to discuss from the Turkish Lira crisis is that government money is fragile, whether it's the Turkish Lira, the US dollar, the European euro, etc. Government money is fragile because it depends on the competence and the goodwill of the government. And this is not just something that has happened to Turkey. It has happened multiple times in the past. For example, in Weimar Germany, Venezuela, and Zimbabwe, to name the most notable examples of hyperinflation. But it does happen when governments are incompetent or don't have the best interests of the people at heart. And unfortunately, that can happen and has happened and will continue to happen if we keep relying on government money. I need to point out that inflation isn't just affecting Turkey, although Turkey had the most serious case of inflation, or one of the most serious cases of inflation, but inflation is affecting countries all around the world, including the United States, where most of my viewers are watching from. And if you look at the inflation statistics, the last time I checked, the US had a 6.2% inflation rate, which is very high, very worrying, and it's actually a 31-year high. And that means that your money, your wealth, is being devalued because of inflation, and you need to protect yourself against it. But again, this isn't an American problem, or only an American problem. It's not only a Turkish problem, it's a worldwide problem, because ever since the pandemic, countries around the world had been dealing with economic problems by funding economic programs by printing a lot of money, which leads to inflation. And the US is lucky because it's the world reserve currency, so there is higher demand for US dollars, which makes the US dollar a bit more resistant to inflation. But because of the mismanagement by the government, the inflation is pretty high. And from the news reports, it seems to be an increasing problem. And to give you some personal anecdotes, I've been traveling around the world a lot the past year. In Brazil, the currency in Brazil, the Brazilian real, if I pronounce that correctly, devalued against the US dollar, because although the US dollar is experiencing inflation, other countries are experiencing inflation as well. And since the US has the world reserve currency, that makes other countries experience inflation at an even higher rate. And when I was in Ukraine, if you look at the Ukrainian hryvnia against the US dollar, the value of the hryvnia has depreciated significantly against the US dollar for a while. So that makes the US dollar and Americans a bit luckier to have the US dollar as the world reserve currency, but still there's inflation and your wealth is being devalued because of the inflation rate. So again, it's a worldwide problem and you should be aware of it, and this is a lesson that needs to be discussed. Government money has problems. It depends on the competence and the goodwill of governments, which is not always the case, as the past year has shown. So we know the problem. What is the solution, or what are the solutions? What steps can you take to protect your wealth from the fragility of government money and from inflation, which has affected so many countries around the world in the past year? I recommend investing in gold. Gold was traditionally the currency, and it was a far more reliable currency than fiat money. And that is for a multitude of reasons. First of all, gold is indestructible because of its chemical properties, which means that gold is a very good store of value because you can't really destroy it. Gold is also rare, and gold mining is difficult and expensive, which makes it resistant to inflation. So unlike paper money or digital currency, which can be increased by the government arbitrarily, you can't do that for gold because mining gold is difficult and it is also expensive. So that is why gold is much more reliable in terms of having a currency that is very resistant to inflation. Also, unlike government money, gold also has inherent value, whereas paper currency or digital currency only has value in that you can use it to exchange stuff. Gold is valuable even if you don't use it as a means of exchange, because gold is rare, it's indestructible, and it is beautiful, which means that it is in high demand in jewelry, in aesthetic purposes, in design, architecture, etc. There's also a lot of other commercial and industrial demand for gold, which makes gold very valuable. And that is why even after gold was demonetized by a lot of governments when they went off the gold standard, the value of gold against fiat currencies like the US dollar rose significantly anyway, because there is inherent value to gold, just like there's inherent value for diamonds and platinum because they are rare, they are beautiful, they can be used in jewelry. The same applies for gold, and gold also has a lot of other purposes as well besides jewelry. And even though central banks say they officially demonetize gold, they don't act like such, because they still hold a lot of gold reserves, and that is because they recognize the monetary value of gold. That is also why a lot of investors invest in gold when they don't really trust the strength of their currencies. And if you look at the purchasing power of gold, it is stable, and it even rose even after demonetization. So that is why gold is such a good investment when it comes to protecting your wealth. But besides gold, I also recommend investing in platinum. And I made a whole video about the investment case for platinum, so check it out. I'll link it in the description, and I'll also overlay it at the end of the video. But a lot of the reasons for platinum also applies for gold, but I think at this time, an investment in platinum is an even better idea because it is currently undervalued compared to gold. Another option that a lot of people have been practicing is investing in crypto. There is a reason why cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin have become so popular in the past few years, and that is because it's decentralized. It doesn't rely on the competence and the goodwill of governments, and it also has mechanisms which makes it resistant to inflation, because mining, for example, Bitcoins can be difficult and can be expensive. But for me personally, I want to do more research before I invest in crypto, so I won't personally recommend it to you, but I will point out that there is a reason why it has become so popular in the past few years, and it's a good idea to look into crypto as well to protect your wealth. These are the investments you can make to protect your wealth from being devalued by inflation. I hope this video was helpful, and if you did find it helpful, make sure to give it a like, because it will help it in the algorithm so we can spread the message, which is important. Also, comment your thoughts, comment on what you want me to discuss next, because I'm here to help you guys succeed in business, in your finances, and in life in general. Make sure to subscribe for more helpful content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.